Okay. Dan and Greg, can you hear me?
Yes, but you're echoing.
Let's see if I can make that go away. Better? No.
I think it's because you're joined on twice, Bill.
I was trying to watch what we're doing on one screen, but I couldn't turn the audio off on it. So here we are. Let's give it one more minute. For everybody tuning in, this is a candidate, or not a candidate form, but an election form on issue 1, which is the proposed permanent increase to the Arkansas sales tax to fund highways. And we're going to give this maybe one more minute, and we're going to start here in just a second. And I am going to share screen, I think. Did I do that successfully?
Yes.
Hooray, thank you. Well, let's get started. My name is Bill Kopsky. I'm the director at the Arkansas Public Policy Panel and the Citizens First Congress. And I want to thank everybody joining us tonight for this important discussion about issue 1, which is a permanent sales tax increase to fund highways in Arkansas. We're part of a broad coalition that is opposed to issue 1. And a lot of voters are confused by the 3 different ballot measures on the ballot this year. And so we're doing a series of these forums to educate voters about that. Tonight with us, I have Dr. Dan Scheinman from Audubon, Arkansas. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
And Greg Henderson from the Arkansas, or from the Little Rock Downtown Neighborhood Association.
Everyone.
So I'm going to kind of give a quick overview of what the proposal does and a few key points for those of you that have just a minute to tune in. And then we're going to turn it over to Dan to talk about their specific concerns from Audubon, Arkansas, and then over to Greg to talk about the Neighborhood Association's perspective on the measure. And then we're going to open this up to questions. If you have questions and you're watching this on our Zoom link, you can put those questions in the chat or in the question and answer section. And we will get to those when we get to the discussion part. And if you're watching this on Facebook, we're broadcasting this live on Facebook as well. Make sure you share it with all your friends, start a watch party, do all that Facebook stuff. But you can put your questions there in the comments section. And then this video will live on afterwards on our Facebook page, and we'll probably link it to our website too over at citizensfirst.org. I had a tiny little bug crawling across my glasses I had to get rid of. So, you know, it's live television, so to speak. So I'm going to get started. Again, my name is Bill Kopsky with the Citizens First Congress. And I'm just going to quickly tell you what a couple of things that issue 1 does. Issue 1 is a ballot measure referred by the politicians in the Arkansas Legislature to place a 1/2 cent sales tax increase for the Highway Commission permanently into the Arkansas Constitution. Pretty unusual for a tax increase to be lodged in our Constitution. Usually that's over in our code. It's much more difficult to change the Constitution. So that's one important aspect of this. This replaces or would replace a temporary sales tax for roads that was passed in 2012 and that is expiring in 2013. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts about exactly what the measure is. Why do we oppose it? We oppose this at the Citizens First Congress for sort of 3 core reasons. We think it's bad tax policy that hurts low and middle income families. I'm going to talk about that for just a minute. It's bad transportation policy, and it ties our hands to deal with our future needs. And when I say it's bad tax policy, sales taxes are the most regressive tax we have. And what we mean by that is low and middle income families pay a much larger percentage of their income in sales taxes than they do in other kinds of use taxes or in income tax or excise tax. And so generally we're opposed to them. Arkansas already has the 2nd highest sales tax in the country. Even though it's the most regressive tax, it means our overall tax system in Arkansas is grossly unfair. In Arkansas, if you look at the total tax burden for families, low-income families pay over twice the total tax rate that wealthy families pay. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the tax nuts and bolts in a few minutes to sort of show you a graph about that tax distribution and talk a little bit more about that. But in at the core of it, it's just not a fair tax. The other reason from a tax policy that this is bad is cities and counties in particular really only can raise revenue through the sales tax or through the real estate property tax. And this is really going to tie the hands of cities and counties and also tie the hands of the state to deal with future needs. Because again, we're baking this 1/2-cent sales tax increase into our Constitution. And so as we come out of the COVID crisis and need to deal with the economic crisis or the health crisis or the education crisis that all of this has created, if we've already dedicated permanently in our Constitution a 1/2-cent sales tax for roads, it's going to mean that there's less revenue available for lawmakers to address all the other needs of the state. And we think particularly in this moment, this is really bad timing to be locking a tax increase into our Constitution. We also think this is bad transportation policy. The Arkansas Highway Commission doesn't look at alternative transportation. They're notorious for funding large projects in urban areas and neglecting rural needs. And they're just generally not very transparent or accountable in how they spend money. And we think there needs to be reform there before we put more money into the Highway Commission. And then, I've already mentioned it ties our hands for future needs by kind of locking in some tax increases. So that in a nutshell is why we think this is bad policy. I'm going to come back to this and get into some more detail later, but right now I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Dan Scheinman from Audubon, Arkansas, so he can share with you some of the reasons why Audubon is concerned about this measure.
Thanks, Bill, and hello, everyone. You may be wondering why Audubon, Arkansas, a bird conservation organization, cares about a sales tax for transportation. Well, it isn't about the regressive nature of a tax that does not put the burden on the primary users, nor is it about funding the unnecessary widening of I-30 on the side of town where the Little Rock Audubon Center sits. No, for Audubon, Arkansas, issue 1 is about the contribution of RDOT's Roads Only program to climate change. Transportation is now the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. So by voting no, you, the people, will send a message to RDOT that they need to change their Roads Only program. And to regain that public support, RDOT should reduce tailpipe emissions from cars and trucks by investing in things like public transit systems, bicycle and pedestrian projects, and electric vehicle charging stations along highways, greener forms of transportation. Because without substantial climate change mitigation, plant and insect communities will change, influencing the availability of food and water and shelter for birds and resulting in ecological disruption for birds and for us. The National Audubon Society's climate report, Survival by Degrees, found that 32 Arkansas bird species are climate vulnerable. But that number drops by nearly half if we slow the rate of global warming. So the scientific consensus is clear. The only way to achieve a more favorable future for birds and people is to address the underlying causes of climate change. And that's why I urge you to vote no on issue 1. Do it for the birds. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That's awesome. I think your all's perspective from the climate perspective and just the conservation perspective in particular is really, really important to the voices on this. So thanks so much. And again, if you have questions, I just want to point out again, if you have questions and you're watching us on Zoom, you can put those questions or comments in either the comment field or the Q&A field in Zoom. And if you're watching us on Facebook, make sure you share it and start a watch party on Facebook for us. You can tell in the background, I'm broadcasting from my garage here. You can put your questions or comments on Facebook straight into the comment thread on the video there. And we have folks monitoring that, and they're going to feed me your questions or comments so we can get those up. So with all that, now I'm going to turn it over to Greg Henderson, who is the president of the Little Rock Downtown Neighborhood Association, and who is also a candidate for city council here in Little Rock. So Greg, you want to share some of your all's perspective on this?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. We've been from Downtown Neighborhood Association. We are one of the largest neighborhood associations. In fact, we may be the largest neighborhood association in Little Rock. And for us, the impact of highways and freeways really directly impacts our neighborhood. And not only does it impact our neighborhood, it impacts greater Little Rock because more people use our downtown neighborhood than any other neighborhood in Little Rock. And so we've fought against the highway department on things like the 30 expansion. And last month we joined the opposition to ballot issue number 1 for really, in my mind, 3 key reasons. First is that the highway department has shown little regard for building to meet the best interests of residents. Second, that the permanent sales tax is not even the most logical way to maintain roads. And third, that building freeways does not even support good economy within the communities. So starting off, the highway department has shown very little regard for building the freeway infrastructure to actually meet the best interests of residents. Granting them a permanent sales tax would make the disconnect between roads that we build throughout Arkansas and the communities that they impact even larger, and would essentially give them a blank check to do whatever they wanted. The freeways in and around Little Rock area have been dividing the city for decades, and residents have continuously opposed this freeway building. And Arkansas Department of Transportation has really ignored any of our concerns, any of our wishes, so much so that even while building the 30 expansion, they completely ignored any impact to the local residences and businesses. Second, and this is something that Bill touched on earlier, is that a permanent sales tax is not even the most logical way to maintain roads. If you look at states with the best kept roads, they don't put permanent sales taxes in place. They utilize use taxes. Use taxes put the tax burden on the people utilizing the roads the most through gas and diesel tax. In fact, if you look at the primary support for this ballot initiative, it comes from the heaviest users of our state highway system. Those people are Walmart and Tyson and JB Hunt and others that have poured millions of dollars into supporting this tax initiative and millions of dollars into lobbying our state representatives to introduce this ballot initiative in the first place. As it's been stated, this is a regressive tax. By taxing the sales tax, it doesn't actually do anything for the people who are responsible for the wear and tear on our highway system. They want you to pay for it. And because if you don't, then the obvious answer is that the people who actually use it the most and who actually create the wear and tear the most will be the ones who have to pay for it. You wouldn't want to be charged a tax for somebody else's shopping trip every time you got in the car. So why would it make any sense doing the reverse of paying every time you went shopping to pay for somebody else's use on the roads and the wear and tear? Finally, and I think that this is really important, is that building and expanding freeways does not support good economic growth within the communities. And that's something that we're very interested in downtown as an area that's seen a lot of interest come back to the region. The rationale that the highway department always tries to throw out is reducing traffic, but it really does little to alleviate traffic concerns. There's been plenty of studies that show that. And not only that, if you haven't driven in Little Rock much, there's not that much traffic to begin with compared to any other city our size. What overbuilding freeways does, though, is it encourages people to move out of our communities and onto someplace else. It impacts our local economy by keeping people commuting away from businesses and away from local residences. And it lowers our tax base by encouraging people to live somewhere else. Finally, it also increases our social divide, making the areas within our cities less accessible for people commuting, coming from home to work. And so for these 3 reasons, I really urge people to look at issue 1 as a bad ballot issue for Arkansas, not just for Little Rock, because I've also had these same conversations with people all across the state in every community across the state. And they all say that they are tired of Arkansas Department of Transportation doing this very same thing to their communities. Thank you.
Well, and Greg, I want to follow up on a couple of key points there. One is that a massive percentage of this tax increase is going to be spent on highways in Little Rock and Northwest Arkansas that large percentages of our populations say they don't even want. Yeah. And while rural highways are largely ignored now and will likely be ignored in the future. And so I think the governor and others have really tried to sell this as a pathway to funding rural road improvement, which is a need in the state. But if you look at where they're actually spending the money, it's on these large boondoggle projects in Pulaski County and Washington and Benton counties. Can you speak a little bit to that and sort of how unresponsive the Department of Transportation has been to you all as you've tried to get them to make adjustments to the plan? I mean, you're the community that's right in the middle of this large widening project, and they've not been very responsive, is my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go back and look at the original text behind the sales tax, it was supposed to go toward rural highways that are 4 lanes or less, and a good portion of it is supposed to go toward improvement of those highways. Less than 10% of what's been spent through the sales tax has actually gone to what the governor and the state legislators that put this in place actually said they were going to use it for. Whereas they've also used that same money to expand 630 in Little Rock. They're using it to have the largest single highway project in the state of Arkansas. It may be the largest construction project in Arkansas, if I'm not mistaken. Right here in Little Rock, it's going to make it turn from a 6-lane highway to, at points, up to a 14-lane highway, which is absolutely ridiculous. Meanwhile, if you look at other areas in the state that, really have.
Did you just say a 14-lane highway?
Yes. Yeah, it will be up to 14 lanes. So it's going to have 5 through lanes, and it will add 2 passing lanes on each side of that at points.
I know.
So on each side of the river, it's going to be up to 14 lanes.
I know a lot of folks that take a good 2 lanes through their community, and we're building 14 lanes here. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at other areas of the state, so my wife is from Southeast Arkansas, and so she moved up here, so we go down there quite a bit. They have, projects that end in basically woods because funding for those projects was supposed to come from this bill, and instead they cut off the funding for it so that they can pay for projects like this in Interstate 49 up in Northwest Arkansas. And so literally the freeways come to an end in the middle of a forest, and they have no money to spend to actually get needed transportation and needed pathways down to some of the areas of Southeast Arkansas that are very, very heavily economically impacted right now. And the communities are drying up because they can't get enough people to stay down there. They can't get enough commerce to stay down there because there's just not a good roadway system to get down to the area. This was supposed to fund some of that. It was supposed to fund expansion over in Western Arkansas so that areas like Mena could actually connect better to, say, Fort Smith and Little Rock and Texarkana, where they could actually be a community that's connected and can actually see some economic development going on in those communities because businesses refuse to locate there because there's no good way in and out of the area.
Well, this might be a question for you, Greg, or maybe for Dan, but you can tell from my background here that our family likes to ride bikes. I mean, I think one of the challenges with this proposal is that the Highway Commission is so focused solely on giant highways as the solution and is not really looking at alternative transportation models. Like Northwest Arkansas, for example, definitely has some congestion issues and some transportation needs. But the highway department's not been working with local residents there, not working with local residents here in Central Arkansas about looking at the whole spectrum of transportation modules and what we need, whether that be alternative transportation that addresses climate change, that addresses traffic needs, that addresses, like you were saying, Greg, really building local community. So Dan or Greg, do either of you want to talk about kind of that feature and sort of what a full-throated kind of broad transportation plan should have?
Dan, I'll let you go first since I had the last one.
Oh, well, there's just many alternatives to simply encouraging more cars to be on the road, encouraging more rail transportation instead of diesel trucks, more biking, like the trail that's going to connect Little Rock to Hot Springs is a great example of a green way to get people from point A to point B. RDOT's just not investing in those things, unlike in many other states where their Department of Transportations are are investing money in green forms of transportation. And I think we all need to send a message to RDOT that they need to change their ways if they want our support. If they want continued tax funding in the future, they got to come to the table and negotiate for a change in their way of doing business. And folks, I've got to go to another meeting, but if you want to learn more about Audubon Arkansas's position, you can go to ar.audubon.org/news.
Thanks so much, Dan, for joining us tonight. I appreciate that. And I'm just going to segue. Greg, I think you all, or some of the others working on the I-30 project here in Little Rock, funded some studies of transportation and traffic that really indicated that building wider highways oftentimes leads to more congestion and not less. Do you want to talk a little bit about your all's perspective on why just widening the highway through Little Rock is not a solution to the congestion challenges that we have at brief periods of time?
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing is if you look at most major modern metropolitan areas, they're not building freeways, they're actually tearing them down. Pretty much any study that you can find in the last, decade or two has pointed toward that highway expansion really just increases traffic. It gets people out of the secondary roads and onto freeways because they're built to handle higher volumes. And all it really does is just further congest those freeways. So it really doesn't do anything to alleviate the problem that they're even trying to have. I'd also, like I said earlier, I don't think that there's a very good argument for Little Rock having any kind of traffic issues. Yes, in Northwest they do, because the rapid expansion in that area has kind of overtaken what their current infrastructure is. But I would say that it's even getting pretty close to being worked out. I go up there quite a bit, and that's been certainly something that's been dying down as far as overall traffic now that they've gotten some of the bottleneck points taken care of. In Little Rock, there's no good reason for it. There's actually some very legitimate reasons for not having the 30 overpass. I think that would actually increase our economic development. And then we could put things in like, say, a Chester Street Bridge, which has long been proposed. We could do things like making, the area out by the airport a little easier too. We could find, another bridge to put in. We could beef up a couple of areas that would actually alleviate any of the traffic problems that this project is intending to fix in the first place.
Again, I want to point out to our viewers all over the state that one of the challenges with how much of the Department of Transportation is focused on these giant highway projects in urban areas of the state means that they've spent very little attention on rural parts of the state where there are some really legitimate transportation needs. And really the Department of Transportation needs to be reformed so that they're much more accountable to community input on what kinds of transportation gets put into your community. And then we need to see more commitments to that money being spread around. And then that money needs to be coming from other sources than a broad sales tax. So Greg, I'm going to transition for just a minute and go back to sharing my screen and talk a little bit more about how this proposal is funded and some of the specific challenges with that. This is gonna be very brief, but it's so important that I want to talk about it for just a moment. And then remember, if you're watching us on Zoom, you can put your questions or comments in the question and answer section or in the comment field there. If you're watching us on Facebook, you can leave your questions or comments right in the comment thread underneath the video. So please hit us up with your questions. We want to make sure that you know as much as you can know about this measure. So moving on this thing, we think this is bad tax policy is one of the biggest reasons why we're opposed to it. This is a sales tax that's not just on gas, not just on automobiles, it's on everything. And it's a 0.5-cent sales tax increase, and we already have the second highest sales tax in the country here in Arkansas by the time you add all the local and state sales taxes combined. This is asking low and middle income families to pay the burden of keeping our road infrastructure up to speed, when the fact of the matter is the vast majority of damage to our roads is done by heavy trucks. Your light consumer vehicles really do almost no damage to roads at all. They have very little impact on road wear and tear. It's those big rigs that really tear the roads up. That's why when we had Governor Beebe, he really pressed to have a diesel tax, where the trucking industry would at least pay their fair share to fund the highway program. The trucking industry fought and fought and fought against that because they don't want to pay for it. They want to put that cost on us, general consumers. And we just think that's grossly inequitable and frankly immoral. The other reason that we are opposed to this is the sales tax is just so regressive. And so I have a couple of slides I want to share with you. So a lot of people ask us, why is the sales tax regressive? Because it seems like if we all pay a sales tax, it would be fair across all income levels. But here's the fact of the matter. On a sales tax, for low and middle income families, we spend most of the money we earn on items that are subject to a sales tax, on goods, on services, on clothes. Food is still taxed lower, but food is still taxed in Arkansas. Those items are all subject to the sales tax. And so we spend nearly 100% of our income on taxable goods and services. So nearly 100% of our income is subject to that sales tax. The more money you earn, the less of that money you're spending on consumable goods that are subject to that local sales tax. So maybe if you're earning a little bit more, maybe you're going on vacation to the Gulf Coast in Mississippi or Alabama or Florida, and you're spending some of your money there. Maybe you're putting some money wisely into savings for retirement or into a stock portfolio. Maybe you're buying real estate. Maybe you're doing all those other things, but all that money that you're spending on those items, your investment portfolio, your vacations, that's money that's not subject to the local sales tax. So only that portion of your income that you spend locally on goods and services is subject to the sales tax. And so here's a little graphic that says, Mary here has a weekly salary of $300 a month. She's paying 2% of her income in sales taxes, whereas Julie's making $1,500 a month, a lot more. They're both spending the same amount of money on groceries, but for Julie, that ends up only being a little bit less than 0.5% of her income in taxes. And I have another graph that shows you, this is real numbers from Arkansas. The lowest income Arkansans are paying 8.9% of their income in sales taxes. The next lowest, 20%. So this is these three here, from the lowest 20% up to the middle 20%. That's really middle income and low income. That's people making from $48,000, almost $49,000 and below. They're paying between 7 and 9% of their total income in taxes. If you look at the top 1% that are earning more than $420,000 a year in Arkansas, they're paying only 1.3% of their income in taxes. This is completely backwards. Our tax structure should look the exact opposite, so that the most wealthy folks who have the highest ability to pay should be paying the highest amount of taxes. The corporations who use these big trucks tearing up our roads should be the ones paying the taxes to fund the roads. This is doing it completely backwards, and in our view is not only bad tax policy, but it's just frankly immoral to put the highest burden on those who are the least able to pay and who are frankly struggling to build a stronger economic future for their families as it is. So that's one of the biggest reasons that we're just frankly morally opposed to increasing the sales tax for roads. We've already talked a lot about this is bad transportation policy. The Department of Transportation has not been accountable or transparent on their decisions in local communities where they are doing construction projects, and they've completely ignored so many of our rural communities that do have transportation needs. We really need to reform the Department of Transportation before we give them a large permanent sales tax increase. It just ties our hands. I've mentioned this before, but let's come back to it one more time. This is putting a sales tax into our Constitution, a 0.5-cent sales tax that will be there forever. That means that in the future, as we come out of the COVID crisis, if we decide we need to spend revenue on roads, not on roads, on the school systems to help kids catch up from so much lost schooling, or on economic development to help people get jobs, or unemployment assistance to help people do career training, go back to school, all of those things that we really need to invest in right now to help us recover economically. We're not going to be able to pay for it if so much of our state revenue is permanently dedicated to roads in our Constitution. We're going to have massive healthcare needs coming out of the COVID crisis that we already know And again, we're going to be really limited in that. And this doesn't even foresee those crises that we don't know are coming yet. Maybe there'll be a big ice storm or a tornado thing, or other urgent needs in 22, 23, or 24. This is a permanent thing that's going to live until our kids are our age. And so it really ties the hands. These are decisions that should be made on funding by legislatures who can be responsive to the needs of the moment and the time, and really make sound policy based on that. The other thing about this is that cities and counties are really limited in how they can raise revenue at all. They really only have sales tax. In our Constitution, they have two measures really that they can use to raise revenue: sales tax and property tax. If we raise the state sales tax by 1/2 cent, that makes it even more expensive for local communities to raise local sales taxes to pay for parks or water projects or whatever else that they might need to do in their local community. Those decisions belong in your city, in your county, and you don't need to have handcuffs put on you by the state by raising that sales tax so high that in Arkansas already, the sales tax is nearly 10% on hamburgers or other kinds of goods in certain cities in Arkansas. This is just going to make that worse and really tie the hands of government. And so with all that, I think we've given you our best case on why we think issue 1 is not right for Arkansas. And so I'm going to turn that off and look and see if we have any questions. We have none in the Zoom. Let me just click over here and get to our Facebook feed and see if we have any questions there. Greg, maybe you did such an awesome job, you and Dan, that we don't have any questions. Let me check.
You know, Bill, one of the things that I think is most interesting about this is that a lot of times you see, you know, issues like this being a liberal or conservative issue or a right and left issue. You know, you and I have been doing this for a couple of weeks now and talking about this. One of the things that stood out to me very quickly was this is very much a bipartisan opposition to this bill. We have some of the most conservative groups functioning in the state, along with some of the most liberal groups functioning in the state, and then everything in between. And so it's not really a right or left issue. It's not, you know, going on any party. What it is going on is that there's a huge amount of opposition from large corporations that just don't want to pay for the wear and tear that they're doing, and they don't want to pay for any of this that they should be paying for. And there's a big grassroots movement of people who care about the communities, whether they're conservative or liberal, Democrat, Republican, or anything in between, that are generally opposing this. I think this is more of a, you know, are you a citizen or are you a corporation is kind of where the dividing line's been for me, looking at this and looking at the opposition and the people who are supporting it.
I think that's a great point, Greg. I mean, really, the big special interest lobbyists, the trucking industries, the Chamber of Commerce are trying to pull a fast one with our legislators. They put 3 measures on our ballot this year. And frankly, all 3 of them are really impacting citizens' rights. This one's putting a sales tax to pay for their projects permanently in our Constitution. There's the measure that really guts term limits. And then there's the measure that makes it nearly impossible for citizens to bring initiated acts like ethics reforms or minimum wage increases to the ballot. And so all 3 of these look like sort of fast ones trying to be pulled by politicians to limit citizen rights. And if you look at just the coalition on issue 1, we have Tea Parties, we have Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers group. You have organizations like ours that tend to be considered on the progressive side. That's a pretty broad coalition. And we're not often together on a lot of issues. We have good, respectful debate when we don't agree on things, but this is an issue where we're all united because, again, the tax is just so unfair. It's so permanently entrenched in our Constitution. And again, it really is only serving very special interest needs where those big, giant trucking corporations have decided they want roads for their trucks. It doesn't do anything to address the rural needs of the state. It really punishes working families. And those are all the reasons why we're opposed to it. So, Greg,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Especially if you look at this in conjunction with issue 3. So whenever you're hearing the governor speak, he's saying that, oh, well, this is, you know, yes, it's a constitutional, you know, amendment, but you can always overrule that in future ballot initiatives. But when you pair that with issue 3, not only did all 3 ballot initiatives that were citizen driven get removed from this election, and they've been pretty consistently removed over the past 10 years by, you know, opposition within the state legislature. not only is it already hard to get anything overruled on the ballot or get anything put on the ballot to begin with, but issue 3 is actually going to make it practically impossible for anything to ever make it on the ballot again as a citizen-driven initiative. And then you throw in issue 2, and what you're seeing is that, okay, now we're going to say that all of these state legislators that are, they're trying to restrict citizen rights, once their term limits are up, they can set out a couple of years and run back again and start doing the same thing all over again. So the 3 of them combined are just a terrible block of ballot initiatives. And I think that the most logical thing is just to vote no on everything this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. So one thing that you can do tonight is make sure, so many folks in Arkansas don't understand these ballot measures. So make sure that you share what you've learned with your community, your circle of friends and family. We've shared in the chat on Zoom and embedded in the comment section on the Facebook feed, a link to a fact sheet that we've made that kind of reiterates some of these key points. This video will live on our Facebook page. Please share it with anybody that you think needs to know about it. And again, we know that there are transportation needs in Arkansas, but this is the wrong way to do it. And we hope that by defeating this, we can go back to the drawing board and come up with the right way to fund a modern transportation system that addresses rural and urban needs for the state of Arkansas. And with that, I just want to thank Dr. Dan, who's had to leave us a little early, and Greg, thank you for all of your advocacy on this, and good luck with your race in City Council. And thanks for sharing your insight with us tonight. And thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight. We really appreciate you. There's upcoming forums on issue 3. And then we have several candidate forums coming up in the coming weeks as well. We're in full-throated election season. The general election now is less than 4 weeks away. So please stay engaged, make a plan to vote, and get out there and vote. And thank you everybody for your time tonight.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye, everybody.